We're broadcasting live to the world on the web. It's wonderful to have you with us. I have a rather special guest with me today. No, I have a very special guest with me today. A man of soldiering across the world, a man who has returned to his home territory of Northern Ireland, Portadown man, yes. Portadown mum, a Guildford father. Yes. A man who's come back to involve himself in the crucible of our Ulster politics, and you're with Mike Nesbitt in the Ulster Unionist Party, and do give Mike my regards. We worked together in the BBC. Mike presented Good Morning Ulster, and I had responsibility for the editorial content of Good Morning Ulster. So we've retained a friendship.
It's a small world, isn't it?
It's a small world, certainly. But you went into soldiery in the army as a young man, as a boy soldier almost.
Yeah, well, I was 16. I was struggling to find my way in life at that age, and as most people do at the age of 16. And because I came from a sort of a military background, I kind of felt like I slipped into the military by accident.
Yeah. But was military in the Beattie household?
Well, it was.
Your father.
My father was a soldier, and my two brothers had just joined up the years before. So there was nearly an expectation where people were looking at me to join. So I did join. And you know what? I'm not saying that when I did, it was the greatest decision of my life, but it was certainly the most interesting, because the first thing I did as a soldier, a trained soldier, was to go to Berlin to guard Rudolf Hess.
Wow, for goodness sake. And you did that?
And at 17 and a half, I stood in Spandau prison guarding Rudolf Hess.
And you were in touch with the war criminal Hess?
Well, in touch, you weren't really allowed any sort of interaction with him in any shape or form, but just being there. But of course, at 17 and a half...
You were in his space?
Yeah, I didn't know that, though. At 17 and a half, I was a young boy, and all I wanted to go was the nearest pub to have a pint of beer and chase the German ladies in Berlin. When you're off, as you do. But it's an amazing decision and a thing to do.
Absolutely. Can you remember what the moment, Dougie, of decision when you said, I am going to follow the family line, I'm going into the military?
I remember I was doing really well at school. At 16, I was going to the Portadown Technical College, and I was in a good stream, and I was doing very well, and I could have went on to do other things, and I wanted to go on to do other things, but I decided to take a day off school, as you do at that age, and I just was lost for something to do, and I went into the recruitment office, and I joined, and I remember forging my father's signature. My mother
there are many boys did that at the time of the Somme.
Oh, but
goodness great, you were retracing history.
Well, I was doing what many Ulster soldiers used to do before. But my mother had sadly died the year before, and my father was a little bit of a loss, missing her awfully, and I felt a little bit of a burden. So I joined, and I forged a signature, and I didn't tell him until the day I left to go to the army. The night before I left, I had a document which he had to sign, and I says, Dad, I've joined the army. I'm leaving tomorrow. Will you sign? And he signed it, and that night I flew to England. And I started my training in a place called Norton Manor Camp in Somerset.
What was the metamorphosis that next morning? You're a boy of Portadown. Now you're in the camp in England. You're up against it here.
Well, you know what it was like. This is 1982, and you know what it was like in the 70s and the 80s. You know, it didn't matter if you were a Protestant chap from Ulster. It doesn't matter if you were a Catholic chap from Ulster, you were an Irishman.
Yeah.
And the bigotry shown against Irishmen in the military, and certainly in training, was tangible to what's shown to some Muslim quarters of today.
My goodness.
And I felt that abuse at a very early stage. As a 16-year-old boy, I couldn't quite fathom why these soldiers who were there to look after me and train me as a young boy were so against me, were so bigoted against the fact that I was an Irishman.
Dougie, was there a moment when you had almost, if not literally, but almost literally, was there a moment you had to go toe-to-toe with them and say, stop?
Well, there was a number of occasions when I had to go toe-to-toe. There was some awful occasions where they abused me, and there was two of us. It was me and another young lad from Ballymena who joined at the same time, and they abused us badly, and they used to call me Paddy. Now, Paddy isn't a bad term, but when it's used in a derogatory term, it's very noticeable. Yeah. And I literally had to go, not just to my peers, but to the young men who I was serving with, and say, listen, I don't like it. You won't use it. And that led on a number of occasions for me standing toe to toe and fighting with some of these people and arguing back. And after a while, they got that, they got used to that. And I then got away slightly lighter. My friend who was from Ballymena didn't do that. And he allowed and accepted that abuse, and it escalated and escalated, and he got a really bad time.
And of course, latterly we have seen young soldiers in the army, for all kinds of reasons, been driven to the very edge of life, and often over the end of life.
Yeah.
Suicide has occurred.
Absolutely.
And you're describing a scenario in which that would have been a possibility for a lesser person, a weaker person.
Well, possibly, but in 1982, it was nearly the normal. It was nearly what you expected as a soldier when you joined. And I've got to say, it is something that stayed with me in later life, because I suddenly found that I was so disappointed as a 16-year-old boy that those in charge of me didn't respect me and didn't look after me. So that in later life, when I was a soldier, in some awful and terrible circumstances, I reflected back to that, and I really tried to be the best person I could possibly be for those people who are in my command. And I used that as a learning tool, and I still use it today as a learning tool of how not to lead, how not to command, and how you respect other people.
Of course, you had a good mentor there in your colleague, the officer in Afghanistan. Of Tim Collins.
In Iraq in 2003,
yes. Tim Collins was there, the famous speech that Tim said. It was a speech talking about how to deal with people, how to react and how to interact with those you were there to be with, and to, in a sense, you weren't fighting with them, but the indigenous population, how to deal with them.
Well, do you know what? It was against the people we were also fighting against too. I remember standing beside Tim Collins. I was his regimental sergeant major at this stage. I was getting on to 38 years of age, and I was standing beside him when he gave his speech. And he was a great orator. He gave his speech. He basically laid out to the soldiers in front of them, and he says, "Listen, we are going to war. You will have to fight. You will have to kill. But don't kill needlessly. Show the compassion that only we can show on the battlefield." And he sort of laid that out. And it was inspiring, and it was sobering as well, and it made people understand what was going to be expected of them. And to great credit, and I'll say this, and I'm very proud, this is one of my proudest moments in my life, when we crossed into Iraq, we were faced with a terrible scene. The enemy who we were sent to fight were absolute wretches, in rags, with no weapons, no food. And I watched my soldiers give away their own food to the enemy soldiers, who were now our prisoners. And when we said to them, "Look, you can't do that, you need to keep it for yourself," they went and foraged for dates so that they could give to these people. And we had to take on the task of burying the enemy dead. And as the RSM, it was my job to organise this. And I remember watching my soldiers from the Royal Irish Regiment pick up a dead Iraqi soldier with incredible gentleness and dig a hole and bury him, after first taking a compass bearing towards Mecca, so that they didn't bury him with his feet towards Mecca, and then going to get one of his friends to say a few words over this dead soldier before they filled in the grave. It was an incredible gentleness. I'm really proud of that, and there's not many people. Everybody wants to focus on the negative, and I try and focus on the compassion showed by my soldiers there, and I've seen the likes of that many times since.
It's an impressive and wonderful story, that, indeed. Battlefield.
Yeah.
You've stood on battlefields, you've crawled on battlefields, you've ran across battlefields.
Yeah.
I suppose the simple question is, what's it like?
It's exhilarating, it's terrifying, it's all-consuming. It can take you from a feeling of elation to a feeling of abject fear, to a feeling of abject failure. It can give you a whole range of emotions. As a soldier in charge of other soldiers, you realize that it's your decision, which is not about whether somebody will have to work hard or not work hard. It's about whether somebody's going to live or whether somebody's going to die. And sometimes you have to make decisions which you don't like to do, but you have to. I remember, and I don't say this because I'm saying this because I'm proud of this, but I remember the first man that I killed, and it was it wasn't, I thought I killed him. I knew I killed him. He was there in front of me and I killed this man.
And you use a gun?
He was an enemy soldier, and I killed him in Afghanistan in 2006.
With a gun?
With a rifle, with a machine gun.
Machine gun.
And he died, and I watched him die. And I carried on with the battle, because that's what you do. But afterwards, when the lull came, you stop and you reflect, because the man you killed was a father, was a brother, was a son, had a family of his own. You don't want to take life as a soldier, but you have to. It's part of what you joined for. He was trying to kill me, and I had to do that. But that doesn't mean I don't reflect on that. I'm glad I reflect on that.
But you're also in that act. You're there. There is the phrase that's often used, a just war. That you have the good guys and the bad guys. And if we look at what's happening in the world today, back into Syria, back into that cauldron of awfulness where people are being beheaded and all human beings are being wretchedly treated and are being butchered. That has to be a good war, if one can use that term.
But do you know what? No war is good, but wars are sometimes necessary. In the same way a fireman doesn't like fire, a soldier doesn't like war, but he knows he will have to fight it at some time. This whole thing that's going on in the world now, call it Islamic State, call it ISIL, call it IS, call it the Muslim, call it what you want to call it, but this is becoming global. It's not even regional anymore. This is becoming global. And they have an aspiration which is absolutely opposed to the democracy that we know today. And because of that, they need to be stopped. But we have to be smart in the way we stop them. You know, the world is not about how we view things in the West, in the US or the UK. We have to view things through their eyes. And therefore, to defeat these people in places like Iraq, in places like Syria, Al-Shabaab in East Africa, we have to use regional forces who understand that, not Western forces. We don't need to march back into Iraq again like we did in 2003. We need to support the people who are there, the Iraqis, the Kurds, the Jordanians, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They need to grasp this nettle. And people will say, well, they're not up to it. And I will say to them, well, we did the same in Somalia. You know, well, Al-Shabaab was running about in Somalia. We didn't go in with Western troops. We went in with Burundian troops, with Ugandan troops, with Kenyan troops, people from that region, and they have done a good job, and we supported them.
Well, the Emirates and other indigenous forces are part of the coalition now.
Yes.
And they're going in and they're doing what needs to be done there. And we kind of prophesied that this would happen. 10 years ago, we were looking forward, and we knew that there was this horde coming towards the Western standards and the Western way of democracy. We knew the danger was there. And the demographic was showing, and it's still showing, a growth in that kind of population of difference who deal with things in a different way. And the threat was always there. But it's now been taken on. And can you get any part of your being around the inhumanity that exists with these people?
Absolutely not. And we're outraged, and sometimes we feign outrage because somebody has beheaded somebody from the United States, or somebody has beheaded somebody from the United Kingdom. But the reality is they are beheading their own people in their hundreds. They are shooting and maiming their own people in their thousands. This is not just radical Islam against the West. This is radical Islam against its own people. You know, it's far greater than what we're seeing, and we need to remember that. We need to stop saying it's just about what people are doing to us in the West. This is what these are forcing on their own people. Somebody has to do something, and we need to help them to do that.
You're pleased then that we're moving in the way we're moving, that things are, the flights going in, the bombings, taking people out and taking evil folk out. That has to be done.
I think it has to be done. I don't think the government has entered into it lightly. I do think we have got some difficult times to come. I do believe that because we are bombing, there will be groups out there who will get larger, who will become more radicalized against us. But we cannot sit back and let this happen, because if you just look at the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, and you look at their aims, and their aims are to have a single Islamic state and reinstigate the Levant. And the Levant is parts of North Africa, it's parts of Egypt, it's the Suez Canal, it's the whole of Palestine and Israel. It's part of Syria.
It's ultimately world domination.
It certainly is, and it starts regional, and they are appearing everywhere. I mean, the United Kingdom is a dangerous place in some quarters now because of the radical Islam and the preachings of it. And it's not all. You know, I can tell you a story about the bravest, most noblest man I've ever met in my life, who I fought beside, who was an Afghan Muslim. You know, and I say that without any repercussion whatsoever. Absolutely the bravest, noblest man I have ever seen. And I fought side by side with him for 13 days, and he saved my life on a number of occasions. And he died on the last day of the battle, fighting alongside me, and I cried when he died. So I don't have an issue with Islam or Muslims, but there's a radical element out there
without a doubt.
We have got to tackle some way or another.
When you hear the heart of the Muslim philosophy, that when you hear, there's the lovely phrase, Alhamdulillah, it is with God, God be praised. That's beautiful.
It really is.
And it empowers people to do great things. And it is we keep saying it, it's a minority within the Muslim faith that are going in this direction, but a powerful minority.
Oh, it's hugely powerful, and it's getting more powerful, and it's that what we have to degrade. But the only way we can degrade that and degrade their ideology is by people from within their own religion, from within their own ideology. So you defeat radical Sunni Muslims by using non-radical Sunni Muslims. That's the way we must do it, not by using British forces or US forces traipsing around their country. That's something we learnt in 2003.
Did we ever even begin to imagine in the two Gulf Wars that we would ever think that Saddam Hussein wasn't such a bad fellow after all?
Well, do you know what? Do you remember when ISIS first hit the news? It was a shock. Most people weren't expecting it. Most people didn't see it. It just happened, and nobody was ready for it. And actually, you know, sometimes you look at the tyrants of this world and you say to yourself, do you know what? They kept these people in check.
Now you got it. Yeah.
Assad, he kept them in check. You know, Gaddafi kept them in check. You know, Saddam Hussein, he kept them in check. Awful people, but they kept them in check.
There's a pragmatism there, a need to do it, and it was done for selfish reasons, but nevertheless the lid was kept on the thing, and it wasn't overflowing in our... New York at the moment, they've upped all the sort of security in the city, and London's the same, Paris is the same. There's the danger, really. There could be retribution.
There is, and I think there's a scary scenario here, because if you look at what's happening in Afghanistan, if you look at what's happening in Pakistan, and the fact that Pakistan is a nuclear country, and you look at the disintegration of parts of Russia, you look what's going on in Ukraine, and you look at nuclear weapons and how the smallest thing can be smuggled out of that part of the world and smuggled into other parts of the world. It is a dangerous world that we live in.
Absolutely,
you know, and you know, I think we see part of this global fight, and we see the very open part of the global fight, and I don't think we see everything else that goes on. There's an awful lot more going on. Yeah,
you've come back to us to Northern Ireland, and you've sort of out of the frying pan into the fire of politics. You know, it's an interesting move. It's not an unexpected move, because if you were motivated in the way you've talked about as a soldier, to translate that into being of service in the development of a society here that is good and just and proper. But it's your first foray into politics. Yes?
It really is. You know, I sort of left the military, mainstream military, in 2009 and came back to Northern Ireland. Wrote a couple of books which were reasonably successful, and there was a purpose behind them, and I managed to publish them. And I went back to Afghanistan in 2010 and come out of Afghanistan in 2011. And when I come out, I suddenly realised that physically, mentally, emotionally, I no longer had the ability to do that anymore. But I hadn't lost the feeling that I wanted to serve a community. And Barry, my whole army career had been spent travelling the world, but now I was home, this was my home, and I want to serve the people in my home now. I looked about on how I could do that. I looked about on who had the voice which most resonated with me. And I looked at NI21, and I looked at Northern Ireland Conservatives, and I looked at the DUP. But you know what? The one political party which really had the voice that I thought I wanted was the Ulster Unionist Party. So I looked into them. I met with Mike Nesbitt and a few other people from within the party, and I listened to what they were saying, and I liked that very simple, clear message. And I think sometimes we have to view things in primary colours. We do get sidelined by things, but we need to view things in primary colours. And I thought the Ulster Unionist Party now, you know, after many years in the wilderness, we're now all sort of singing in the same song sheet, and that's the way I wanted to go. And I also thought that I could bring something else to it, because I have fought around the world many, many enemies.
Yeah.
I have walked the streets of Dungannon, South Armagh, Fermanagh, Belfast, and I have fought our own internal enemies and our own internal demons. So I have fought many enemies around the world, and I hate none of them. I hate none of them because I've learned to understand what they are trying to achieve. So I have the ability, I think, to understand the full spectrum of the people who live in Northern Ireland.
Yes.
And in some ways understand some of the people who live in the Irish Republic.
Yes.
And I think that I can understand and I can represent some of these people.
You see, you come ideally suited to the next chapter, if you like. We're in a situation now where the Republic of Ireland, their growth rate, their economic growth rate, year on year for the next 5 years is forecast as 4.5%, that kind of thing. We deal with it in the economic end of the programme here. Now that's we in Northern Ireland, we're going to increase by 0.74% or whatever it is. The dynamic has changed a bit. People are more and more interested in survival. You can't eat a flag. And
no, you can't.
People are beginning to realise that more and more. Now, from your external activities outside of here and dealing with the blood and guts theatre of war, gives you a great sense of power and wisdom to impart. Not that you're looking down on people, telling people what to do, but there's a breadth of understanding that perhaps you can bring, which will take the thing forward.
I think so. I think symbolism in Northern Ireland is so incredibly divisive and destructive. And I can say, and I try to explain to people, that I fought around the world, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Bosnia, in Kosovo, in Africa, and I fought around the world, and not once did I need a Union flag above my head to show me that I was a British subject. I didn't need it. I was very secure in what I am.
That's a lovely the word secure.
Yes, and I'm very secure. And I think a lot of people who argue about flags are so insecure with where they are, and they need to put it behind them. We are part of the United Kingdom. We are part of the United Kingdom, and we will prosper within the United Kingdom. We have to be secure with that and let it get on.
It's not an issue.
And we need to sideline some of these things. You know, they have to be dealt with, but they have to be dealt with in context.
Yep,
you know,
indeed.
people have to live, and there's people out there who are increasingly finding it difficult to make ends meet, and they're not interested what flag is up the street.
We're in a world of food banks and homelessness and drug addiction.
We absolutely, and
no money for health services.
And a world of, and still a world of conflict.
Aye.
You know, and
we could be an oasis here.
We could say, and there's wonderful people, and I always look, and it always amazes me, and I look at Ulster Rugby, and I look at the stands in Ulster Rugby, and I see all of these people standing together, cheering for one team. You know, people with the old 1972 Ulster flag, people with the Ulster provincial flag, standing by side, cheering for one team. And I say to myself, how do you take that off the Ulster rugby stands and put that onto the streets? How do we do that?
Well, you're now going to carry that on your shoulders and carry it out onto the streets.
Do you know what? I would really want to. I would really love people to look and say, well, here is a man who doesn't look at you and ask what religion you are, because I'm not interested. You know, I just want people to say, look, I'm interested in what you need to aspire for a good life for you and your family and a good future.
Dougie Beattie, thank you for coming in.
It's a real pleasure.
It's been a remarkable half hour, and we've reached the end of the programme.
Okay.
And thank you so much. We always advise people, we just offer them a mantra at the end of the programme, simply saying as people I work with in Nigeria, they will always tell you across the great river, you know, when you've done your best at whatever it is you're trying to achieve and feel you can do no more, simply lay your head in your hand and leave the rest to the God you believe in. That would be our constant message from Africa to the people. And go well, be happy, and bring happiness with you wherever you go. And good luck to you.
No, what a pleasure.
Dougie,
thank you very much indeed.
Give my regards to that Nesbitt man.
I will do.
Tell him to keep doing good things.
I will do.
Thank
you
care.
very much.
All the best to you.
Cheers.